Our speaker for the evening is Sandra Steingraber, and she's going to be talking about wine, not brine. And thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
As I told Marianne, my first job in this world was actually as a waitress. So I'm actually very comfortable working while people eat. So please carry on, and I will too. I'm a big admirer of our host tonight. I feel a great kinship actually with Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association, because their mission is not only to advocate for this lake, but to explain and promote the understanding of the lake. And as a biologist myself, I feel like that's what I spend my time doing as well. So thank you very much for letting me be your speaker tonight and be your guest. I think all of us have in common a great love for Seneca Lake and a fascination for it, which is what draws us all together. And I think that we all have our own paths to this lake. For some of us, we have spent generations in summer cottages. It's part of our childhood. It's part of our family memories. For others of us, as scientists, it's a fascination. And my own path to this lake, well, and I'll begin autobiographically, is this. I grew up far from here in central Illinois, a place where there are no lakes, but there is a river, the Illinois River, and that's on the bank of that river is where my father built the house that I grew up in. I was always interested in biology, and that's what I that's what I majored in college at Illinois Wesleyan. But in between my sophomore and junior years of college, my life completely changed when I was diagnosed with bladder cancer on my 20th birthday. And it was questions by my own diagnosing physician about the possible environmental exposures that I had experienced as a child that put my feet on the path that I'm now on, which is my field is environmental health. I think absent that diagnosis, I probably would have gone off to medical school. But I learned very quickly that bladder cancer is a disease that, of all human cancers, recurs more often than any other kind of cancer. It recurs in 70% of all patients. And once you have a diagnosis, you are forevermore in and out of the hospital having checkups every few months. In fact, I just finished, I'm now 55, so 35 years of being a bladder cancer patient. I just finished my semi-annual ultrasound and lab work and cystoscopy, and I'm still waiting for results from the pathology lab. So that's how it is when you have bladder cancer, even if you have a very good outcome. So it was really questions by my own diagnosing physician that led me to believe that some kind of chemical exposure in my childhood was the explanation. And so those of you who know my work as a science writer know that I went back to my hometown with the help of a postdoc at Harvard and became a kind of environmental detective in my own hometown, and indeed discovered two things. And this became the subject of my book and then the film based on that book, Living Downstream. The first thing was that I was not the only person to have cancer in my hometown. In fact, I was one data point in a cluster of cancers. The cancer rates are unexpectedly high in my zip code. The other thing I found out is that indeed there are bladder carcinogens in my hometown drinking water wells. And to learn that, I filed Freedom of Information Act requests, kind of going through some of the same procedures that Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association, very able attorney now, does on the institution's behalf. The kind of chemicals in my hometown drinking water well are dry cleaning fluids, specifically a chlorinated solvent for any of you chemists out there called perchloroethylene, which has known links to bladder cancer. So whether I had discovered the smoking gun or not, I concluded that no one should grow up as I did drinking dry cleaning fluid. And so I dedicated my professional life to studying the link between environmental exposures and human health. That's what I do as a scientist. Now, I became lucky enough to meet my husband at about the same time. And so when we married and I discovered I was pregnant, which was an amazing thing, and I truly did lie down on the same ultrasound table where I had once been scanned for signs of tumor for my very first prenatal ultrasound, and I had to remind myself, if they see signs of growth this time, it's a good thing and not a bad thing. That was in Boston. And then we felt like we wanted now that we had a daughter, and I named her Faith, and I'll let you decide why a cancer patient might have a child and name her Faith. We decided to look for a place to raise our growing family, and we now have a son, also Elijah, that was unlike the place where I had grown up, which I loved dearly. But I didn't want to raise a child in a place with contaminated water. And so we looked all around, and we're lucky because my husband is an artist, and at that point I had a book out. It was fairly well received, and so we had the fortunate position of being able to kind of look at a map and choose where we wanted to live based on our own personal criteria, which were a place that had pristine environment, uncontaminated water, and really good schools and a great culture, and also inexpensive studio space for Jeff. And so we had a friend here at Cornell who invited us to take a look, and we immediately fell in love with this place, and so came here. And then when I became fortunate enough then to have my second child, I chose to give birth to him actually right on the banks of Seneca Lake. And then some of you might know, that was the old Septermber Hill Birth Center in Montour Falls, which was part of the Schuyler County Hospital. And the scene of that event actually found its way into some writing I did a few years later in a book about protecting children in an age of environmental crisis. The title of that book is actually named after my son, Raising Elijah. So I'd like to begin here by just reading the birth scene from Raising Elijah. And I guess I'll set this up by letting you know that my daughter, who was born in Boston, was actually born during extra innings of the World Series. The Red Sox are playing that year in 1998, and thankfully for the extra innings, we were able to zip across Boston with no traffic at all, right past the ballpark and into Beth Israel. So what major sporting event do you imagine happened on the night of my son's birth? I'll give you a hint. His date of his birth is August 10th. NASCAR. I don't like NASCAR. Here's how it goes. On August 9th, 2001, the mid-afternoon high hit 98 degrees, and another temperature record fell. Faith was desperate for a nap, but couldn't settle down. We tried various sleeping spots, various storybooks, and various lullabies. Her fretfulness went on, and during the third encore of Daniel in the Lion's Den, I noticed that my come-and-go contractions seemed to be recurring more purposefully. So as I sang, I began to surreptitiously time them. They became impressively regular and did gradually Faith's breathing. My daughter at this point is a 2-year-old. One child was entering sleep just as the other was about to make an appearance. A sweaty arm was flung across my chest and a hand twirled in my hair. Faith was exhausted. The next contraction was hard and long. I knew that if I got up now, she would rouse and start crying again, and that would be the end of nap time. And without a nap, she would be miserable. But not everyone's needs were going to get met here. This was a new thought for me. My usual mantra, family first and work second and everything else after that, didn't really offer me any insights. And so not for the last time in my life as the mother of 2 children, I had to look at one of my kids and say, I'm sorry, but I can't always be fair. And then I got up. The barometer fell all afternoon. The big storms skirted around Ithaca, thundering in the distance, but the cold front they brought with them arrived later that night. The next day's high would only be 84, but by then I was carrying my son outside my body rather than in. With the approval of the midwife on call, we decided to find, here were the results of a study I conducted entitled The Impact of NASCAR Racing on the Timing of Human Birth. As we drove into, getting from our cabin to September Hill Birth Center, a renovated farmhouse next to the county hospital in Montour Falls, had required a 45-minute drive. At the 35-minute mark was Watkins Glen. The road through this village passes by vineyards, dairy farms, bait shops, and offers the view of a waterfall-laced gorge. It's a tranquil place, except on the few nights of the year when it isn't. Watkins Glen is a NASCAR town. Its fast and fearsome speedway is hailed as America's road racing mecca, and qualifying races for 2 different series were scheduled on the night of Faith's birth. When we pulled into town, the entire village was a car, stereo, thudding tailgate party. And of all the people navigating the clogged streets that night, I was the one who was least interested in the news that the best lap time in the qualifyings was an awesome 138 miles per hour. Here are the results of the study I conducted. The impact of NASCAR racing on the timing of birth. Labor contractions ceased entirely, as though they had never existed. With the approval of the midwife on call, we decided to find a nearby hotel for the night rather than return home, and thus became the Joseph and Mary search for a room. There was no room here at this hotel, except that instead of a donkey, we were accompanied by a sleep-deprived toddler, and an hour later had secured something slightly cleaner than a stable. For the second time that day, I lay down with a frantic child and tried to coax her to sleep. And for the second time, just as she drifted off, a hard contraction took my breath away. It was immediately followed by another, and then another, and then another, and Jeff's qualifying times were impressive. The midwife met us at the door and led me gratefully to a whirlpool tub. Immediately, in the way the water floated me, something on the verge of unbearable became bearable again. Something on the verge of terrifying receded. Yes, I was now in labor, truly in it. Labor was a room with a ticking clock, a tiled wall, and swirls of light. Labor was the shale floor of a briny sea, magma, pressure. I descended by braille. I rose through the squeezing passageway of my own breathing. Labor was a sparkling lake named Seneca. I could swim a long way, and nobody even knows I'm here. When it came time to push, I pushed hard. I needed to push. I wanted to push. And whatever other verbs existed in the space between needed and wanted, I did those too. And then he was in my arms, and the rain arrived, and somewhere in a nearby pond, frogs, like loose banjo strings, started twanging. So Seneca Lake is the birthplace of my son. My son Elijah, who's now 13. And so it's a holy place to us, an important place, a place I always hope to be able to bring him here. The part I didn't narrate in that scene, I actually, after managing to make it through the NASCAR traffic, induced labor to come back again by actually walking along the banks up and down Seneca Lake and until I went into that whirlpool. And that's something none of us will ever forget. That's the story of the creation story of my son. And so that's my autobiography. That's my love for this lake. And I'm sure each of us in this room has a story like that connects us to this lake in very profound ways. And we now happen to be, and many, I want to say that obviously generations of people have had connections like that to this lake. We know that. But we happen to be the adults now, alive, who have to do something really important, because this lake has, over the years, many environmental threats, but none as big as it faces now. And so we really have to ask ourselves, what we intend to do, what are our responsibilities, what are our obligations to this lake that we love now at this moment in history. So I come back again and again to something my own father said, who was a typing professor at the high school. And among other things, he taught business and bookkeeping and shorthand and things skills that are probably no longer required anymore. But he could type 100 words a minute with no errors on a manual typewriter. That was his claim to fame. And so it was very important to him that I also have good typing skills. And so he sat me down at his desk with his typewriter and put me to work typing over and over again the phrase, and this was kind of standard teaching and when you learned how to type. The phrase was, "Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country," over and over and over again. A lot of you are nodding. The people with white hair remember doing that, right? And so somehow I took that to heart, not just the speed and the accuracy of typing those words, but the meaning of the words themselves. And I want to offer them to you now because I feel that now is the time for all of us to come to the aid of Seneca Lake. And here's why. So Seneca Lake, and there are many people in this audience who know this better than I. There are geologists in this audience and hydrologists, so I'm speaking very humbly here when I try to explain this. Seneca Lake is the largest of all the Finger Lakes, and more than half of all the water contained within the Finger Lakes is in Seneca Lake. And as such, it is the largest body of fresh water wholly contained within the state of New York. It therefore serves as a source of drinking water for 100,000 people and offers serenity, beauty, inspiration, and recreation for all of us and also visitors and tourists that form our economy. But in addition to all that, there's so much water contained in this lake because of its great depth. It's one of the deeper lakes in the world and one of the deepest in North America, that it changes the climate. Right, so water is this great absorber of heat. And so thanks to Seneca Lake, the summers here are cooler than they would otherwise be, and the winters here are more moderate. And as a result, the banks of this lake and the hillsides on both sides of it, for the 50 miles up and down both sides, become perfectly suited to the growing of wine grapes. And so it's the lake that really forms a microclimate that allows the wine industry to thrive in this area. And that change of habitat exceeds Seneca Lake and flows over into the other Finger Lakes as well. And so the whole Finger Lakes region is suitable for wine grapes, not only because of all the other individual Finger Lakes, but primarily because of this incredible reservoir of water contained right here at Seneca. And the other interesting thing about this area is that it used to be a shallow ocean. So this was the north bank of a shallow sea 400 million years ago. And that, of course, becomes the story of fracking, because the shale bedrock underneath our feet, of which this is the north bank, is the ancient seafloor of a much older body of water that used to inhabit this place, that extended as far south as West Virginia, the East Bank, which where the Catskill Mountains are now, and then it extended west all the way to Ohio, where Ohio is now. And so that ancient seafloor then became a graveyard of ancient creatures, mainly sea lilies and squid. This is long before there were even fish in oceans, because this is prior to the evolution of vertebrates. And so you didn't have anything like fins or eyeballs or lungs or breasts. None of that stuff existed yet, but you did have sea lilies and squid and a lot of plankton. And so when those creatures died, their bodies, their corpses sank to the bottom of this ancient water system. And because the Earth in 400 million years ago did not contain as much oxygen as it did now, as it does now, because land plants, among other things, hadn't yet evolved, the oxygen level in the water was also lower than it is today. And so these creatures didn't have enough oxygen to really decompose, and instead they became bubbles of methane. And they became trapped in the silt And then as under lots of millions of years and lots of pressure, the silt turned into shale, and those vaporized corpses of sea lilies and squid turned into bubbles of methane, also known as natural gas. So those are also down there, about a mile below our feet. And of course, the desire of the oil and gas industry to come after them, blow the bedrock up, take the natural gas out, is part of the ongoing conversation and controversy around fracking, right? And we've made one decision here in New York. Pennsylvania has gone another direction with it. And the border between our two states does not follow any ecological boundary. It's simply a line across the map. So you see two different outcomes, like twins separated at birth. One state going through a shale gas boom and the other state protected by a moratorium. Here in Seneca Lake, we have another story, which is also a prehistoric one, and it has to do with the salt caverns that are on the banks of this lake. And those salt domes were also part of this ancient prehistoric history of this ancient ocean that used to be here. And over time, these salt formations got squeezed together, and they formed these big dome-like structures. And so about 100, 150 years ago, people figured out that they were down there and learned how to drill into them, pour hot water down the hole, and let it dissolve the salt, and then sucked it back up, and now you had this kind of briny water. They could spread this briny water on their roofs of their homes and let it evaporate, and what was left over then was very fine table salt. And so the salt industry then found a home in this area, and it became, in part, a cottage industry, especially after the Erie Canal was built, because families, including children, could be put to work taking brine and spreading it out on the roofs of their homes and raking it, and then when it was all dried out into these beautiful salt crystals, they would bag it up and sell it on the Erie Canal. And this salt, which had a long shelf life, could be value added for families who lived in this area. Could supplement income. So beginning in the 19th century and into the 20th century then, more and more hot water was poured down these holes into the salt domes along the bank of Seneca Lake, and then hollowed them out. So instead of having a big ball of salt, now you ended up with these kind of vessels of salt. And these are about 1,000 feet or so below the surface. So here's now, to bring us all the way up to the present moment, here's our situation. A few years ago, and I'm kind of skipping over the different companies that were bought out by other companies, and I'll just use the name of the current company. A Houston-based company called Crestwood Midstream had purchased 5 miles of lakefront on the west shore of Seneca Lake, not because it enjoys the scenery or the view, but because it wanted access to those salt domes, which are now hollowed out vessels. And the plan is to store highly pressurized natural gas, methane, which is being fracked out of Pennsylvania so fast they're running out of places to store it. So we solve a storage problem for the industry. And also another byproduct of fracking called liquefied petroleum gases. And these come in 2 forms: butane, which is cigarette lighter fluid, and propane, which most of us know well, right? Because they're in propane tanks and they're part of our heating system in rural areas. So those 2 gases together, butane and propane, are known as liquefied petroleum gases, or LPG. So when you see these signs, no LPG, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about butane and propane. And so these abandoned salt caverns then would become the home for both of these kinds of gases. And the reason we talk about them separately is that when you compress natural gas, it does not liquefy. The only way to liquefy natural gas, you've probably heard of LNG, liquefied natural gas, but that is done through cryogenics. You can't do it through pressure alone. So you have to bring the temperature down to about minus 260 degrees before methane, natural gas, will liquefy. And that's what you do when you don't have pipelines. So if you want to ship your natural gas across the ocean to Europe or to Asia where the price is higher, you need to liquefy it and put it in those big tanker trucks, tanker ships, which look like long ships that have kind of 3 giant spherical balls. You've probably seen those, right? And inside each one of those spheres then is liquefied natural gas. And those spheres are all like giant thermos bottles. You have to keep it very, very cold. And in fact, if you let it vaporize, natural gas will increase its volume by a full factor of 600, going from a phase change from liquid to gas, and it's explosive. And so you have to keep it cold. So you only do that if you have to go places where pipelines don't allow you to go. Otherwise, you keep it as a gas and you send it down a pipeline. So therefore, there are 2 very different projects that are planned for Seneca Lake. One is to build a pipeline that would send natural gas in with a compressor station that would then compress it and shove it into those salt caverns, unlined. It's not like it's a root cellar where you're going to put these things in jars or bottles. The salt cavern itself serves as the walls of the container. And then the liquefied propane and butane come in a different way. They come in not by pipeline, but by rail or by truck. So you have the big black tanker train cars, and then the white, I don't know why one's black and one's white, but that's how they are. The trucks come in white. And so those then would fill our roadways with tanker trucks carrying butane and propane that would head up to the west bank of Seneca Lake, north of us here in Watkins, Glen, near Redding. And then those would be injected down into the salt caverns. And then we would bring some in by train, and those would cross Watkins Glen train trestle. And thus, in addition to the below-ground infrastructure, you would need a 24/7 train and truck place where you kind of are unloading this. That would be, so all these would be a big transportation hub. And indeed, it's a huge plan. Crestwood Midstream brags to its investors that it intends to transform this area into the northeast hub for the storage and transportation of these fracked gases. So let's back up a little bit more then and ask where these are exactly coming from. And I'm doing research on this now. And to do that, I went to southwestern Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, where these liquefied petroleum gases actually come out of the ground as part of fracking operations. And I can't say for sure because it's a very well-kept secret, the so-called chains of custody among natural gas operations as to who their customers are and who they're selling what to. But what I can tell you is south of Pittsburgh, in that part of Pennsylvania, and you kind of conjure up a map of the United States if you can in your mind's eye, there's a part of that kind of southwestern corner of Pennsylvania that actually borders on West Virginia. Remember, there's that little finger of West Virginia that kind of sticks up there. And it's a very beautiful place, very Appalachian, very remote and rural. We're talking about Greene County and Washington County, Pennsylvania. A heavily, intensely fracked area where drilling and fracking operations are just going gangbusters. And so in that area, the gas is called wet gas, meaning when it comes out of the ground, and now I'm going to go back to using the language of paleontology, those vaporized corpses of gases that used to be ancient marine organisms that are now hydrocarbon gases. They come in more than one form. It's not just methane, it's also ethane, butane, propane, and including things like benzene, formaldehyde. So any of you, again, chemists out there will know that those are all organic chemicals. They all are carbon-based chemicals that represent the rearranged molecules of once living organisms. And so in that part of the world, you didn't just get natural gas, you got all these other hydrocarbons too. So what the natural gas industry is interested in is the methane. So it's blasting that out of the ground and putting it in pipelines. But in the meantime, up comes all these other gases. And so there's value added for the industry if they can sell them to the petrochemical industry. So ethane, which is another gas that's trapped in the shale that is liberated along with the methane, is the building block for things like plastic and farm chemicals like pesticides. And so the ethane is actually then separated out from the methane and taken to ethylene crackers, which are these big facilities. Most of them are in Louisiana, near the Gulf, that then begin the process of turning those things into things like PVC plastic or farm chemicals and so on. There's so much ethane coming out of the ground in Pennsylvania that Pennsylvania would like to build its own ethylene cracker north of Pittsburgh and make plastics and pesticides that way. So this is just an aside now, but one thing I want you to consider about this is that those chemicals are not going to be made because we have a human need for more plastic. They're being made to solve a waste disposal problem for the gas industry. Just keep that in mind, because most of that plastic all ends up as nanobits in the Pacific Ocean and the big garbage patch, because oceans are downstream from everywhere else. So we're all supposed to be reducing, reusing, and recycling. But thanks to the fracking boom, a lot more plastic is going to be coming at us because of all the ethane that comes out of the ground along with the methane. All right, so then there's the butane and the propane. And so we have to figure out where that's going to go. And so that's why I think these salt caverns are so attractive to the industry, because we're in the middle of this shale gas boom that's bringing so much methane out of the ground, but all the other liberated hydrocarbons have to be stored somewhere. And so we have been selected out to be the home for all this stuff. Okay, so what are the problems with that? Well, it turns out that old unlined salt caverns are actually dangerous vessels for the storage of flammable explosive gases. And that's been illustrated at least 10 times now. So if all of the, if we look at the track record of the storage of underground gases in salt caverns, and you ask, well, what do we know about that? Is it safe or not? It turns out that 100% of all of the catastrophic accidents that have occurred with underground storage of LPG and methane have occurred in salt caverns, just like the ones that we have, especially when the kind of salt caverns you have are what's called solution salt mining, which is exactly what was practiced here. In other words, you poured water down the hole and you dissolved the salt and you sucked it back up. And one example of one of those catastrophes occurred in about 10 years ago or so in Hutchinson, Kansas, when salt caverns stored natural gas, methane, leaked through unknown, unmapped subterranean fissures and fractures that were so small they had kind of passed everyone's attention, and then ended up kind of filling up people's basements and caused deadly explosions 7 miles away, in a town 7 miles away from that salt cavern. Here in New York, we have another example, which is the 1994 collapse of a salt cavern in Livingston County, New York. Now, that was a slightly different story, but what we do know about that calamity is that it created vast sinkholes. It filled up basements with natural gas, and it permanently poisoned a drinking water aquifer. So what do we know then? So that's what we know in general about salt caverns. And what do we know about Seneca Lake salt caverns per se? Well, we know that these salt caverns are vulnerable to roof collapses. And if a roof should collapse, then that could allow pressurized gases to escape. We know that in the 1960s, a 400,000-ton roof collapse did occur in one of the salt caverns that's now slated for methane storage. And we know that in spite of that, the Federal Environmental Regulatory Commission, over the objections of many of us and over the objections of independent geologists, went ahead and approved Crestwood's natural gas storage plan last May in 2014. So I'm going to back up again then. So we've got methane coming at us, and then these liquefied petroleum gases, butane and propane. it turns out that they're controlled by two very different part of our levels of government. Because methane has to travel in a pipeline, and interstate pipelines are controlled by our federal government, the decider for the methane storage in Seneca Lake salt caverns is the federal government, and specifically in the form of an agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That's in Washington, D.C. But because propane and butane come by tanker and by train, the decider in that case is the state of New York in the form of the DEC, which is under the control of the governor, the Department of Environmental Conservation. So now I'm bringing our situation up to the present moment. On August 11th, 2014, so just a month ago, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, called a temporary halt to Crestwood's plan to stockpile LPG in Seneca Lake salt caverns. And it did so by announcing a special issues conference. An issues conference is a prelude to a full judiciary hearing, which hypothetically could happen here depending on the results of the issues conference. And that issues conference will investigate ongoing health, safety, and environmental concerns of propane and butane storage on the banks of our lake. That would not have happened without the intervention and insistence of many people in this room, and each and all of you who contributed to that are heroes of mine. So we got the attention of Governor Cuomo and the DEC. A lot of winemakers right from Seneca Lake got on a bus. They held a press conference in Albany. They sat down with the DEC. They explained all this. Lots and lots of comments were submitted. All of us, whoever testified, whoever gave information, thank goodness for Rachel Treichler and everything that she overturned. We have laid this before our state government, and we have caught their attention, and they're putting their finger on the pause button. We have given ourselves some time, and that is an amazing accomplishment that we've done. So I want to celebrate all that, and we couldn't have done it without Seneca Lakes Pure Water Association. So, the DEC has granted no permit yet for the underground storage of butane and propane, and we intend to keep it that way. On the other hand, the issues conference does not address the question of natural gas storage, which is equally dangerous, and some would even say more dangerous. And that is, the decision has already been made by the federal government, except that it is the job of the state government to give a permit for the underground storage of the methane. So there is one tiny piece of it that after the approval happens of the federal government, the DEC still has to weigh in with the permit that allows them to go ahead and store the gas underground. Now, interestingly enough, so far the DEC, as far as we know, has not issued that permit. Usually that's automatic. So that is another, to my way of thinking, a tiny glimmer of hope that hasn't yet happened. And again, I think that part of the reason for that, that what's normally just kind of automatic and reflexive, the feds approve it, the state issues the permit, the fact that it hasn't issued the permit is almost certainly due to the fact that dozens of wineries and business owners from the Finger Lakes traveled to Albany to urge the governor not only to express opposition to the LPG storage, but also the methane storage on the grounds that all of this gas poses an industrial menace to the tourism and the wine industry, which is the goose that lays the golden egg, not just for us, but the wine industry is a $4.8 billion industry for the state of New York. This is a major tourist destination, a first-class tourist destination. We call the Watkins Glen State Park the Yellowstone of the East for a reason. More than 1 million visitors come here. And it's very apparent to all of the folks who are professionals in the tourist industry that all it would take is one catastrophic accident on Seneca Lake, and anybody who was thinking about spending their next vacation here or doing a destination wedding here or doing a wine tour here would Google that, and that would be the first thing that would come up. And that would spell the end of this beautiful thing that we have going here that we want to share with the world. And I think the winemakers were very persuasive to the governor's office in the agency called the DEC. And at the same time, we had the assist of dozens of Schuyler County health professionals who also wrote a letter objecting to both methane and LPG storage in these salt caverns on the grounds that they raise unacceptable risks of catastrophic accidents, injuries, but even they pointed out if nothing bad ever happened, the air pollution and the water pollution that would just come along with that is also unacceptable. So let's just kind of break that down for a minute. So when you store pressurized gases in salt caverns underground, the way to kind of, and then you need, let's say you need to sell some of the propane, so you're going to suck some of it out. You can't just leave an open hole because then things expand to fill the space and potentially become explosive. And so when you pull the gas out to take it to market, you replace that volume with brine. So these salt caverns will naturally fill up with briny water. So you siphon that off and put a big pit full of brine, which already exists now, right? They've already done that part of it, some of it. And then you can refill, you can pull the propane out, put the brine in, and so on. So it becomes the brine becomes like the lid that kind of tamps everything down. And so in the process of doing that, you have to be very carefully control the pressures. And you do that by having flare stacks, giant flare stacks, 60 feet high, where you're going to be flaring off some of the gas. So that's what you would see on the west side of Seneca Lake. And when you have flare stacks, you make formaldehyde. You also invariably leak methane, so methane is just leaky. And methane itself is a precursor for smog. So you create ground level ozone, which is what smog is, simply by having volatile organic chemicals floating around in the air. In the presence of sunlight, they turn into ozone, which is a triangular shaped molecule of 3 oxygens. Ozone is a powerful cellular poison. It's linked to asthma in children. It's linked to heart attack and stroke risk in us adults. And it's also poisonous to grapevines. It turns out that grapevines are very sensitive to smog, and they grow more slowly in the presence of ozone. And so does alfalfa, by the way. So here we have, and alfalfa being the major component of hay. So here we have our 2 major agricultural crops of the Finger Lakes, pastured alfalfa and wine grapes, both being exquisitely sensitive. They're like the asthmatic children of crops. They need clean air. And we would put those at risk by the day-to-day practices of bringing gases into this area to store, partially because of the necessity for flare stacks, and partly because of all the trains and the trucks and all the additional diesel and so forth that would go along with that. So that's what the healthcare professionals called out in their own letter. So what was then the response to Crestwood when we made such a hue and cry over this threat to our lake that the DEC declared that it would do a special issues conference on butane and propane? Well, within 24 hours, Crestwood filed with the federal government, the FERC, the Federal Environmental Research Regulatory Commission, a letter that explained that submitted the implementation plan for moving forward with the methane piece of the project. And so, and this is like a 34-page document. So we pushed the pause button on one thing, and the very next day they moved very rapidly forward with the other part of their project. So I think the message that we then delivered in a rally that we did with 300 people, where we called people to the gates of Crestwood in August, was to say that it doesn't really matter to us whether you're talking about, what chemical you're talking about, methane, butane, propane. They're all explosive. They all put our lives at risk. They all threaten our dominant industry and everything we love about this place. And that it's a cynical shell game to move forward with the storage of one type of pressurized gas, even when the DEC has issued a cease and desist order on the storage of the other type of gas. And then the other message we delivered that day was to refer to Crestwood as a dangerous intruder in our community, willing to flout the will of residents in order to build out the infrastructure for fracking. So that's the story that I came to tell you about, and invite you to think about what role you would like to play as an agent in the story, because we have this opportunity not to just to be bystanders and sit around and see how this is all going to play out, but to realize that two very different visions for Seneca Lake are now in front of us. It's a lady and tiger kind of choice. We can either build wine, build tourism, and a whole sustainable system for ourselves, or we can become the natural gas and LPG storage hub for the entire Northeast. But it seems very hard to believe that the two could coexist comfortably side by side. And those of us who believe that the storage of these gases is an obscenity, because we're in the middle of a climate emergency, for one, and we shouldn't be blasting fossil fuels out of the ground. And for another, that some of us have teenage children now. My daughter, Faith, is now going to be 16. My son is 13. These are the roads that they're going to learn how to drive on. In fact, my daughter will go down in just a few weeks and get her learner's permit. Do we really want our teenage children sharing these icy, curvy, beautiful back roads with fleets and fleets of tankers hauling butane and propane? Is that what we imagine? Is that okay? And if we don't think it's okay, then what role do we play? What can we do? What skill set do we have? What experience do we have? What resources do we have to alter the course of destiny here? Because absent our intervention, this is all coming at us. The default mode here is it's going to happen unless we take a stand and do something different. And that's what I want to invite you to think about, what role you should play. And to further encourage you, I thought I would tell you what I know about the roles that some other folks have played, some of whom are in this room, for inspiration. First of all, there are groups of people who have decided, and this is independent of any named organization, that they feel so strongly that they would like to pledge to protect Seneca Lake through civil disobedience. And that they would like to announce their intent and willingness to protest in peaceful, nonviolent ways up to and including civil disobedience until the ongoing preparations for the additional storage of LPG and methane in Seneca Lake are halted. And those folks have signed a pledge so that we can announce the numbers of people who are willing to take that stand and bring it not only before the federal government and before our state government, but also to the investors of Crestwood itself as a way of announcing that the people here look at Crestwood as a trespasser in our community, to say that, look, what we do here in this place is we turn water into wine. That's what we do. This is not the Houston Shipping Channel. And we will make a stand to say that not going to happen. So, and those of you who know me know that that's something that I have tried out, civil disobedience in defense of this lake, and I'll close by telling you a little bit about my experience. But I'm going to pass around kind of in an old-fashioned way. I don't know if I have enough for every table, every person at every table, but copies of the Pledge to Protect Seneca Lake, which are up at a website, Pledge to Resist Crestwood, where if you want to become a signer of the pledge, you're certainly invited to do that. So I simply pass these out for your consideration tonight. So let's see if we can do this gracefully. You want to give me a hand with that? And then there are good elected officials who are using the power of their office to bring attention to the issue. And even though the state and the federal government are the only two deciders, there's symbolic value in communities in the form of townships and counties making their voices heard in the form of resolutions. So this is another very important way of registering our feelings about this and making the case for our own self-determination in deciding what we want our economic future to be, not simply to serve as the industrial proving grounds for an out-of-state company. And so what we really need here, and this is very helpful, are municipalities and counties all around the lake. And the lake, is a huge lake, so it shares borders with a lot of counties, all need to weigh in on this. And I only have one copy of this map, but let's see if we can make this go around the room from Frac Tracker. This shows all the regional governments and businesses opposed to salt storage in Seneca Lake caverns. So each one of these dots on a map shows you where there's a town or a county. And when you look at this closely, you'll see that green indicates where the whole county has has made a strong stance and a resolution against this plan. And the goal then would be to get this whole area in green. So let's pass that around. And so as you look at this map, I want to especially point you to Yates County. Yates County sent a letter to the DEC expressing their concern a year and a half ago. So those of you who live in Yates County, I have a special message to deliver to you, and that is that letter is not enough. It's not enough. Yates County is currently considering a resolution that would replace that letter, and they might be voting on it actually at their next regular meeting. And that's what we need to happen is a real resolution. So we're at a critical juncture. So if you live in Yates County or any of the towns that aren't represented on this map, you need to call your elected representatives and tell them you strongly support a strongly worded resolution opposing any kind of gas storage on Seneca Lake. And then, of course, tell your friends and neighbors to call as well. Remember that FERC has already given Crestwood the go-ahead to expand its natural gas storage. So all of us, no matter what county we live in, we need to call on some bigger guns, some of our national friends in the forms of Senators Schumer and Gillibrand. Those are our national senators, to ask them that they help us intercede with FERC on our behalf and put an end to this insanity. We can write our Schumer and Gillibrand a short letter simply saying Seneca Lake and the Finger Lakes are no place for massive gas storage and transport by a Houston-based gas and oil corporation. That kind of simple message is really important. And then those who want to take a step further, then simply pressuring and encouraging and cajoling your elected officials to do the right thing, you could actually run for office yourself. Laugh if you might, but we have someone among us who feels so strongly that she has decided just today in a press release to announce that she is running for the Schuyler County Legislature, and that is Sylvia Fox. Will you stand up, Sylvia? Sylvia Fox is a native of this place, and she lives here in Watkins, Glen, and she announced today that she's running for Schuyler County Legislature, seeking to unseat incumbent District 6 legislator Phil Barnes. And she's doing a write-in candidacy, so you can talk to Sylvia later on tonight to find out more about that. She let me know what her platform is, so I'll simply read that now. My platform is simple, says Sylvia. I believe in open and responsive government. I believe the people of Schuyler County need elected officials who are willing to carefully consider what their constituents have to say. And I believe we have to protect our pure water of Seneca Lake, which is vital to our tourist and agriculture economy. Her roots in this area go back 200 years. So she's the write-in candidate on the November ballot, and you might know she's married to Finger Lakes journalist Michael Fitzgerald, whose amazing reportage has done so much to reveal what the problems are in this area. So thank you, Michael, and to both of you. And then in the category of banding together to stop this project, I'd like to give a shout out to this sort of sister organization to Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association, which is Gas Free Seneca. So Gas Free Seneca is a more narrowly focused group than Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association. They came together as a kind of ad hoc group to do one thing, which is to serve as the watchdog group for this industry and eventually end this project and get them out of our community and send them back to Houston. And so we can't do without either one of these groups. So even as we're supporting Seneca Lakes Pure Water Association, I do want to let you know that Gas Free Seneca is having its own fundraiser specifically for this issue on October 9th. And I'll pass this poster around as well. So I hope those gives you some ideas of the many entry points that you might consider in joining this fight. And I'll close by, I'm an author, so I'll close with another quick reading. And then I actually have also two very short, a couple minutes each videos to show you. I did commit an act of civil disobedience a year ago at the gates of Crestwood, along with 11 other people. We became known as the Seneca Lake 12. And we were not the first to do that. Before us was the Seneca Lake 3. And before that was Jerry Alderson, who all by him, well, he was joined by two other people, but he all by himself just went to jail and came out. Susan Walker, okay, so there are three people. There were Reverend Gary Judson, Susan Walker, and Jeremy Alderson, who were all arrested together. Susan Walker went to jail first. Jeremy Alderson decided to try to appeal the decision in order to gain more information through the process of discovery about what Crestwood's plans were, but was thwarted in the end in his appeal process, and so finally then ran out of, there was just nothing more to be done, so he then went to jail 2 years after civil disobedience. So it was really the Seneca Lake 3 that kicked this all off, and then we repeated that with 12 of us. And now that the federal government has gone ahead and tipped forward their approval, we believe there may be need for much more than just 3 of us or 12 of us. So if civil disobedience, which has a kind of, I think, all-American, that's how Susan B. Anthony right here in New York State helped to win women the right to vote. It goes back to Martin Luther King Jr., of course, and before that, Henry David Thoreau. It was all new to me. I kind of read as much as I could about civil disobedience and made my decision to join these 11 other people in blockade. At the time, it was Energy, before they were bought out by Crestwood, blockade their gates a year and a half ago to try to bring national attention to that issue. I feel like that part of it was successful. I was able to then to go on the Bill Moyer show and talk about Seneca Lake and make the case. But I guess more than thinking strategically about what value it is, I felt compelled to do this because I had given birth to this son on the banks of Seneca Lake. And my son was a 10-pound baby boy. And I did it with no anesthesia at all. I'm very proud of that. And he was born in this bathtub, right, which I didn't really intend. But I couldn't get out of the water fast enough to have him on land. So my husband and I called it unintentional water birth. And so Seneca Lake water was really his first environment. So for me to go back to the banks of Seneca Lake and stand in the middle of a blizzard between the gates and the truck that had the drill head strapped to the back of it, to do something else kind of extreme with my body was all part of a piece. to defend this place with my body where I had once given birth to him. It had its sort of equivalency, so it felt right to me. So when you are charged with trespassing, it is the same as a traffic ticket. It's a violation, so you don't get a criminal record necessarily. And you can pay the fine if you like, but I chose to not pay the fine. And the additional value of that, I felt, was that it would cost Schuyler County to send me to jail, because there is no women's jail in Schuyler County, so I had to be remanded to Chemung in Elmira. So it cost Schuyler County $85 a day to do that. So that seemed to me interesting to discover that. And I imagined, what if we got a few hundred women willing to do that? That would send a message, I think, about the economic value of Crestwood here at our gates. That might be worth thinking about. But I think what often stops people from civil disobedience, especially the jail piece of it, is that we don't know anything about jail. Jail is like the last place that nobody live tweets from, right? So we just don't have sort of an image of what that would be like. And so my discovery was that it's not so bad. In fact, the most relaxing week I've spent in the last couple of years was in my jail cell. I could just read the Bible, and the phone wasn't ringing, and I had all the time in the world. And in fact, it was a lot like being in the hospital. That's what I finally concluded. And I had all this skill set. I was actually a very good prisoner because I'm a very good cancer patient. I know how to lie on an MRI table without moving for 45 minutes, and so it's no big deal to just spend some time in a 6-by-8-foot jail cell and figure out how to occupy my mind. I mean, I'm good at that. And being in an orange jumpsuit is actually more comfortable than being in a backless blue cotton gown. And if you know how to walk down a hospital corridor with an IV drip, holding your backless blue cotton gown, and you'll have no trouble walking with ankle manacles and handcuffs. You know, they're basically no different. So it turned out it wasn't so bad. And here then is just a few paragraphs from my experience. Civil disobedience is like Planned Parenthood. The second word in the phrase doesn't exactly align with the first one. You search your conscience, you reach a decision, you make preparations, you talk about your decision and your preparations in meaningful ways to all concerned, and then comes the time for action. You leave the condom in the drawer. Or you refuse the deputy's third order to get off the driveway, the one that's owned by the nation's largest natural gas storage and transport company, the one the truck with the massive drill head strapped to its flatbed wants to drive on right now. Either way, where you end up bears little resemblance to the circumstances that kicked it off. To wit, you leave the condom in the drawer. 12 years later, your presence is required at a pep band performance in a middle school gymnasium, which the property taxes on your mortgaged house have helped to pay for. The pep band concert, while charming, is the exact opposite of condomless sex. And while there's a clear connection between point A and point B, you wouldn't exactly call it a plan. Similarly, you might have strong spiritual and biological feelings about drinking water and the possible folly of storing explosive hydrocarbon gases from fracking operations next to and beneath it. And because of previous decisions, you might now have a child who depends on that water and the air above it, and who spends his summer nights at a 4-H camp near the railroad tracks along which said explosive gases are to be transported. And even though you've testified and written letters and submitted expert comments, the company might go on violating environmental laws, polluting the lake, blithely paying fines and planning for expansion. And so, because you believe so strongly in the sanctity of water and loons and the beauty of the boy who plays percussion in the pet band, because he broke his jaw in a bicycle accident, he had to give up the trumpet. Here you are in cell block 5D, far removed from lakes and loons and pet bands. The new skill you have acquired for Earth Day is how to safely descend a set of stairs in ankle manacles and handcuffs. The letter from the pet band percussionist says, "Mom, I'm really popular now on account of you being arrested." The prisoner named Nadine and the other inmates laugh. "You gangsta mama now." So I didn't think I'd become gangster mama, but that's what Seneca Lake has driven me to. And I'll end with what my father taught me how to type. Now is the time for all of us to come to the aid of Seneca Lake and ask ourselves what we would give for this place, what it has given to us, what we would give back. We could really do something big and important here, and I think maybe even inspire people all around the world who are struggling with similar things. I'm just going to, I know it's the hour's late, so I'm just going to close with one of two of the short videos I was going to show you tonight. This one is actually right on Crestwood's homepage, and you can go and take a look at it later on tonight, but what I want you to look at, this is a video that, that they have done. It's right on their homepage. They're very proud of it, and they're sending a message to their investors about what it is they do. And in the video, it shows photographs of their compressor stations, among other things. And so these are the compressor stations that they are planning to piece together, and absent our intervention will almost certainly be built on the west bank of Seneca Lake. So you might wonder, well, what would that look like? And so this will show you what it looks like, and you'll also see what the landscape around these kind of infrastructure projects look like. And then I just want you to ask yourself if you see this as compatible with this place. And remember, they're putting their best face on it, so this is supposed to look really attractive. And the other thing I want to say about Crestwood is it considers itself the prince of the Bakken Shale. So it brings out more oil from the Bakken Shale in North Dakota on more oil trains than almost anybody else. So that's something else it's going to boast about in this film. So let's see if I can make this happen.